The Ford Pinto, one of the automotive industry's biggest mistakes. The Ford Pinto was supposed to be a low cost subcompact made to compete with the Japanese. The Pinto was designed in 1968 and had a marketing campaign of $2,000 for £2,000.
What went wrong? The Grimshaw versus Ford case. Lily Gray and Richard Grimshaw were in a 1972 Ford Pinto when they were hit at 30 miles per hour. The rear end completely collapsed and burst into flames. The court found that the Ford Motor Company was guilty of the inability to protect Lily Gray and Richard Grimshaw. The Gray family was awarded $560,000 and the Grimshaw family $2.5 million. The Ford Motor Company was also awarded a punitive fine of $3.5 million, which was reduced from the $125 million asking.
Lila Coca, the president of Ford, had a corporate belief that safety doesn't sell, and engineers were too afraid to bring up this issue to him, and as a result, the Ford Pinto was hastily designed to compete with the Japanese who were dominating the market. The questionable design was brought to the public's attention in 1977 by an article from Mother Jones magazine.
What were the specific problems with the design? The fuel tank was located behind the rear axle, along with a weak bumper and frame and a filler tube that would pull out in the event of a collision. It created a catastrophic failure. The rear end would collapse, the car would light on fire, and both parties would have extreme damages. The Ford Motor Company knew their design was flawed, and they knew how to fix every single car. But in a cost-benefit analysis, they realized it would be $137.5 million to recall. On the other side, it would only be $49.6 million if people burned to death or had serious injury.
Under the Professional Engineers Act, Section 72, the minimum standard, Ford has failed many sections, all in regard to the protection of life and their clients, along with the inability to make their employer understand the consequences of the situation and being unable to meet the government-regulated safety standards. Same can be said for Section 77, the golden standard. We see similar failures including public needs and welfare, along with professional integrity and competence in work.
What options do a Ford Motor Company engineer have? Number one, they can do nothing. Number two, they can go up the chain of command and possibly whistleblow. And number three, they can leak to the public. What happens if we do nothing? We'll immediately run into problems because you're failing to report, which is in the Act under 72(2)(c). On the other hand, if you go up the chain and possibly whistleblow, this fulfills the duty report. And lastly, if you leak to the public, you run into trouble again under 72(2)(3), which is public expression, and things need to stay under the appropriate chain of command. With all this in mind, we've decided that going up the chain of command and possibly whistleblowing is the right decision. Now first, you need to speak to your supervisor about the importance of a recall. If there is a recall, then you're ethically resolved. With no recall, you need to go further up the chain of command then and explain the consequences more in depth. And again, if there's a recall after that, you're ethically resolved. But no recall this time, and now you need to go to the PEO, which will cause a formal investigation. The company will be under ethical scrutiny, but you as an engineer have fulfilled your position.
From a legal analysis, we can identify the plaintiff as a lead representative of the people and the defendant as Ford, who are being scrutinized under tort law. Under conditions of tort law, we can prove number one, without need for a contractual obligation, the Ford Motor Company owes a duty of care to the customer with every vehicle designed and manufactured. Number two, they did not provide reasonable care while performing the act of designing and building their vehicles. Number three, many members of the public were maimed by the vehicle's safety defect. This includes extreme burns and death along with loss of monetary value from the vehicle's destruction.
Looking at the precedent cases, first, Donahue versus Stevenson, we can see that there's no requirement for a contractual obligation. Second, that a duty of care is still owed. And three, it must be reasonable that the failure would lead to the harm of the customer.
Second precedent case is Winnipeg Condominium versus Bird Construction. The masonry flaw was not discovered by the initial owner, and a duty of care was owed to subsequent purchasers due to this latent defect, which posed a real unsubstantial danger.
Now the liabilities. First, the claim must be made within 15 years of the original act and 2 years of discovery. The Ford Motor Company could have to recover the cost of losses or injuries as a result of the failure of their duty of care. And lastly, they could also face punitive damages, which can be claimed against them. The Ford Motor Company and their engineers have been proven guilty by breaching tort law. they should be liable for consequential and punitive damages for endangering the public, and for not taking corrective actions for reprimanding this.